Hello, I am Tammy Marshall, and today I'm going to share with you chapter 3 of my soft thriller called Twinges. If you haven't had a chance to hear the previous chapters, you might want to go back and do that before you listen to this one or after. So, this is chapter 3 of Twinges. The address turned out to be an older home on a brick street about 10 blocks from the school. Nora drove slowly past the house once and then turned around in a neighboring driveway and parked across the street a fair distance diagonally from the house. The house was well maintained for its age and in comparison to the rundown house beside it, but she could see the white paint peeling in a few places higher up on the siding. The small porch was covered, and a profusion of shrubbery and rose bushes cluttered the front yard. She had a partial view into the backyard where a couple of mature trees provided ample shade. A third tree towered over the detached one-car garage. She couldn't see any name on the mailbox, but she noticed the front main door of the house was open. Through the full-length screen of the exterior door, she could make out some movement which seemed to be coming from a television set. From this, Nora assumed that somebody was home. Nora pulled the collar out of her bag and opened her car door. One foot was on the street, and she was about to step out of her car when Jeremy glided around the corner in front of her on his bicycle and sailed up the driveway of the rundown house. She quickly jerked her foot back in and pulled the door almost completely shut. Then she pocketed the collar once more and slowly reclined her seat to make herself as less noticeable as possible. Peeking through her steering wheel, Nora saw Jeremy's bike lying beside the driveway, its back tire still rotating. However, she didn't see Jeremy anywhere, and she'd been so surprised by his sudden appearance that she'd failed to watch where he went after dropping his bike in the side yard. She considered his house. It was basically a copy of the one she'd been observing, but it was not well kept at all. The yard had more weeds than grass, and there weren't any signs of foliage other than a partially dead old oak tree in the front yard. Far up in its branches, Nora spotted a poorly made treehouse with no visible way to reach it unless there were foot and hand holds nailed to the other side of the tree. Thinking she should leave, Nora placed the key back into the ignition, but before she could turn it, Jeremy burst through the front door and leapt down the front porch steps. A man's voice trailed after him from somewhere deep in the house. Jeremy yelled for the whole neighborhood to hear. Yeah, yeah, I'll be home by dark. He picked up his bike, shoved the remains of a snack into his mouth, jerked the front of his bike around, and jumped onto the seat before the front tire even connected with the pavement. Nora saw him look both ways before pedaling out into the street, and she prayed he didn't see her sitting in her car. Jeremy didn't waver an instant, though. Instead, he pushed off, sailed down his driveway, and took off in the opposite direction. A large puff of air escaped Nora. She'd been foolishly holding her breath, almost in fear. As she mentally chastised herself for reacting the way she had, she allowed a shaky laugh to escape her throat. Ahead, yet quietly, aloud yet quietly, she reminded herself, he's a little boy for Pete's sake. Pulling the collar out of her pocket, she became more somber as she added, and possibly a cat killer. Nora shuddered. Clutching the collar tightly and folded snugly out of sight within her clenched hand, she exited the car and hurried across the street. She'd heard Jeremy's by dark, so she figured she had more than enough time to find out what she could before it even started to get dark. She hurried up the concrete steps and knocked lightly on the screen door. In the dim interior, she saw an elderly woman rise from a recliner and approach her, a kind, yet puzzled and wary expression on her face. Suddenly, Nora felt both foolish and worried, but it was too late. The woman peered at her through the screen. May I help you? Taking another furtive glance around the street, Nora nodded. Oh, yes. Hi. I found this on the playground today, and it has your address engraved on it. She opened her hand and revealed the collar. The woman gasped and put a hand to her throat. Oh my goodness, that's Cher's collar. She opened the screen door enough to reach out and take the collar. Nora watched the woman fondle the tag lovingly. And then, realizing she was about to be joined on the small porch, she stepped aside to make room. The older woman blinked up at Nora through her glasses, and Nora saw the tears welling in her light eyes. Where did you say you found it? Nora kicked herself for having said the playground, but it was too late to change her story. Besides, if it ever got back to Jeremy that she'd been the one who had taken and returned the collar, she could just stick to the story she was about to make up and insist to him that she had found it on the playground. On the playground, ma'am. I'm a teacher at Washington Elementary School. The woman's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and her attention shifted to Jeremy's house. Nora continued with her story. It was lying near the fence that goes around the soccer field. I noticed the address on the tag and thought you might want it back. Maybe you lost a dog or something? She trailed off. The woman waited, but when Nora didn't add anything, she said, Thank you for returning it. Looking at the tag, she added, No, I didn't lose a dog. Cher was my Siamese. Had her since she was a little kitten. She choked back a sob. She's buried in my backyard by the garden she loved to lie in. Suddenly she looked up, and Nora saw that her eyes were like flints now. Somebody killed my precious Cher. That's what happened, Miss Smith, Nora replied with the first surname other than her own that came to mind. She cringed inwardly when she saw the flicker of disbelief that crossed the other woman's face, but she did her best to look bland and sincere. The woman then nodded and said, Miss Smith, nice to meet you. Yes, somebody. She paused and looked directly at Jeremy's house. Somebody killed my cat and left her for me to find right here on this very porch. Nora took an involuntary step backward and almost fell down the steps. How horrible! I'm so sorry. Maybe I shouldn't have returned the collar then. It's clearly just bringing back painful memories. Oh, no, dear. Thank you very much for bringing it to me. I'll put it next to Cher's photo in my bedroom. Nora heard a mule, and then the figure of a large black cat came into view behind the woman, but she pushed the screen door firmly closed. No, no, Rocket, the woman said to the disgruntled cat. Then she said to Nora, He wants out, but I don't let him outside any more, not after what happened to Cher. I can understand, Nora said as she stepped off the porch. Well, I'd better be going. Again, I'm very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Oh, where are my manners? I'm Mildred O'Keefe. Nora reached up and shook the woman's outstretched hand. Nice to meet you, and again, I'm very sorry about your cat. She released Mildred's dry hand. Me too, dear, me too. As Nora was crossing the yard, Mildred called after her. He goes to that school, doesn't he? Feigning ignorance as she turned to face Mildred, Nora asked, Who? She resisted the urge to glance at Jeremy's house. Mildred O'Keefe extended a plump, age-spotted arm and pointed firmly toward the house next door to hers. Him! That little cat-murdering monster, Jeremy St. Clair, that's who. Nora swallowed, but her mouth had gone completely dry. With widened eyes and her mouth set in a surprised O shape, Nora nodded quickly and then turned toward her car. As she eased into the driver's seat and brought it back up from its reclined position, Nora noticed that her hands were shaking. She gave herself a moment to calm down before starting the car. Nora saw Mildred walk to the edge of her small porch and spit toward Jeremy's house with such force that part of her spittle even reached the edge of the St. Clair driveway. As Nora pulled away, Mildred was still staring at Jeremy's house, the small collar dangling from her hand. Twinges. Give it a read.